The first tremor was so faint, Elena thought it was her own nerves. The night was unusually still for a forward-operating base. No wind, no far-off gunfire. Only the hum of the floodlights washing the concrete walls in harsh white. She pressed her gloved fingers to the cold metal of her rifle, willing her body to stay alert. But then came the second tremor. Louder, heavier. The sand at her boots vibrated, and the sound carried up from the earth like a muffled roar. She didn't need confirmation. Something was coming. Her team was already awake before the siren cut through the night. 6 women, hardened by months on this line of defense, ran toward the gate as if pulled by instinct. Their breaths formed small clouds in the chill desert air. Sergeant Elena Mendez was first on the wall, scanning the black expanse beyond the floodlights. And there she saw it. The enemy was moving fast, armored vehicles grinding across the sand, headlights slashed out, but their mass was undeniable. The ground quivered under the weight of an approaching storm. "They're pushing on the west wall," shouted Nyla, her second in command, as she adjusted her helmet strap. "Not the wall," Elena corrected grimly. "The gate." The gate was always the weakest point. Reinforced steel, yes, but designed to open and close. Hinges, locks, points that could fail under pressure. And the enemy knew it. By the time the base's loudspeakers blared breach alert, Elena's squad was already in position. They had drilled for this, dozens of scenarios in training, each designed to make them a living barricade. But drills never carried the same weight as real lives on the line. Positions, sandbags, turrets, everything on that gate. Elena barked. She saw their hesitation for only a second. They were tired. Supplies had been thin. Everyone had hoped tonight would be quiet. But when her voice cut through the chaos, her team moved like clockwork. 3 women scrambled up to man the mounted machine guns. 2 others dragged sandbags into makeshift barricades. Elena crouched at the center, rifle pressed against her shoulder, eyes locked on the shimmering horizon where the first armored silhouette broke into view. The enemy came fast. Mortars arced overhead, slamming into the far corners of the base. Dirt and fire erupted skyward. The floodlights flickered as shock waves rattled the perimeter. And then, with a sound like thunder splitting steel, the first charge hit the wall. The concrete shuddered. Chunks of dust fell like ash. Elena didn't flinch. "Hold that gate," she shouted. "They don't get through us." The women opened fire. Tracer rounds carved the night, illuminating the battlefield in bursts of red and white. Figures fell in the sand, but more surged forward, some dragging heavy breaching equipment. RPGs streaked toward the wall, exploding against the concrete and sending shrapnel across the platform where Elena stood. Her ears rang. Her chest ached with every breath of smoke and dust. But she stayed steady. The enemy wanted the gate. They would throw everything they had at it. And her squad, the women they once mocked as the wallflowers, were the only ones standing in their way. And Elena swore on her life that this wall would not fall. The floodlights dimmed as smoke billowed across the base, but the flashes of gunfire were enough to see the chaos. The first wave of enemies was already at the gate, dark figures moving with precision, crouching low with shield-like panels to absorb bullets. Behind them, a squad carried a battering ram the size of a tree trunk. "They're going for the hinges," shouted Corporal Rena, her voice raw against the thunder of machine guns. Elena leaned into her rifle, sighting the lead ram carrier. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil jolted through her shoulder, and the figure dropped, the ram sagging in his comrade's hands. "Focus fire. Take out the carriers." Tracer rounds converged on the breaching team, tearing into armor and flesh. The ram hit the dirt, abandoned for a heartbeat, just long enough for the attackers to regroup and push harder. From above, mortars whistled down again. One struck dangerously close to the gate, tearing a crater in the sand. Nyla ducked behind cover, her cheek streaked with blood from flying stone. "We can't let them bring explosives closer," she gasped. Elena nodded sharply. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. If even one of those charges landed properly, the gate would be gone. She pulled her headset mic closer to her lips. Fire Team Bravo, cover the flanks. Fire Team Alpha, with me. Pick targets carrying heavy loads. Nothing touches this gate. Her squad responded instantly. Bullets stitched the night, cutting down anyone lugging suspicious satchels or charges. The ground grew littered with bodies and burning debris, but still the enemy surged forward. A deafening crack split the air. An RPG had slammed into the top of the wall. The blast hurled one of the gunners backward, her body crumpling against the parapet. Medic! Elena barked. But there was no time to look. Another breaching team was rushing with explosives. She fired again, hitting one in the chest, then another. Her rifle was hot against her hands, the smell of gunpowder choking her throat. Still, she didn't stop. The gate groaned. It wasn't broken, but the hinges shivered with every impact. They're testing us, Elena muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. They want us rattled. But if the enemy thought they would find weakness in this squad, they were mistaken. Elena glanced at her women, faces streaked with soot, eyes burning with determination, hands blistered from constant firing. They were exhausted, but not one of them had faltered. They want the gate. Elena shouted over the roar. Then they'll pay for every inch of it in blood. And with that, the women dug in deeper, their rifles blazing, their hearts pounding, ready for the next push, because they all knew this was just the beginning. The smoke clung to the air so thick it blurred the stars. Every breath scraped Elena's throat, a bitter mix of burning fuel, dust, and iron. The gunfire hadn't stopped for over 20 minutes, yet somehow the gate still stood. But the wall was cracking. She could hear it in the moan of the steel, feel it in the tremors beneath her boots. The attackers weren't stopping either. They had shifted tactics. Elena! Nyla's voice cut through the haze, urgent. She pointed toward the left flank of the gate. Shadows moved strangely there. Not charging, not in the chaotic rhythm of the assault, but creeping. Too low, too methodical. Elena's stomach dropped. Saboteurs! Night team with me! She barked, vaulting over a line of sandbags. Her squad moved like extensions of her body. Two peeling left, one covering with suppressive fire, another dragging the wounded gunner to relative safety. They reached the flank, just as the saboteurs planted something against the base of the wall. Shaped charges, designed to cut steel like butter. Take them out. The desert erupted in flashes of muzzle fire. One saboteur dropped instantly, his charge falling from nerveless hands. Another spun, firing wildly before Elena's bullet punched through his throat. But a third made it to the wall, slapping his pack against the steel and triggering the timer. Down! Elena dove, dragging Nyla with her. The explosion ripped across the wall, throwing sparks and chunks of steel outward. The gate shuddered, its left hinge buckling slightly. When the dust cleared, Elena forced herself up, ears ringing, lungs heaving. The gate still stood, but a dark scar marked the point of weakness. One more hit like that, and it might swing open on its own. We can't keep reacting, Nyla hissed, wiping blood from her cheek. They're testing us from every side. We need to strike back. Elena knew she was right. Holding ground was one thing, but if they didn't push out, the enemy would keep pressing until the wall gave. She pressed her calm, Rena, cover fire. I need a suppressive sweep across the front. The mounted guns roared to life, a curtain of lead tearing across the no man's land before the gate. Enemy soldiers dropped, pinned, scattered. Under that barrage, Elena and two others sprinted forward, breaking the perimeter for the first time. Sand kicked up beneath their boots, bullets whining past. Elena focused only on the dim figures hunched behind a half-burned vehicle, the saboteurs' rally point. They opened fire as the women closed in. Nyla returned fire with ruthless precision, dropping two before they could reload. Elena flanked right, her rifle steady, her breaths controlled despite the pounding in her chest. She fired 3 times, and the last figure collapsed into the sand. The enemy line faltered at the sudden counterattack. For the first time, they pulled back, regrouping beyond the reach of the floodlights. Elena crouched behind the burned-out vehicle, scanning the darkness. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing down. The next wave would be worse. They always were. She touched her radio. Gate's still standing, but they'll be back. Stronger. For a moment, she let her guard slip, watching her women regroup. Soot-streaked faces, trembling hands still gripping rifles, exhaustion etched in every line of their bodies. And yet not one of them had turned away from the fight. That was when she realized. The wall wasn't just concrete and steel. It was them. The enemy could breach stone. But if they wanted the gate, they would have to break these women first. And Elena was determined they wouldn't. The lull lasted barely 5 minutes. Just long enough for the squad to reload, hydrate with swigs from dented canteens, and exchange the kind of glances that carried both fear and resolve. Then the enemy returned. This time, they brought armor. Engines growled in the distance, louder than before. The ground shook as a column of armored personnel carriers rolled into view, the headlights finally snapping on to cut through the smoke. The sight was almost surreal, steel monsters lumbering toward a battered gate already hanging by stubborn hinges. RPGs ready, Elena shouted. Her team scrambled. Nyla hauled a launcher onto her shoulder, bracing it against the wall's edge. Another woman fetched a second tube from their weapons cache, slapping it into Rena's hands. The first APC fired its mounted gun, ripping a spray of bullets across the sandbags. Dirt and shrapnel flew, pinning 2 of the women behind cover. Elena clenched her jaw, raised her hand, and gave the signal. Now, the RPG streaked out, a blazing arc against the night. It slammed into the lead APC, exploding in a shower of fire and twisted steel. The vehicle lurched, screeched, and burst into flames, blocking the path of those behind it. Cheers erupted briefly from the wall, but they died as quickly as they came. The other APCs rolled around the wreck, guns hammering relentlessly. Enemy infantry swarmed in their wake, pressing forward like a tide. The gate shook again as another charge detonated nearby. The hinges groaned, sparks cascading down like fireworks. Elena, we can't keep this up. Nyla's voice was raw with desperation. Yes, we can, Elena snapped back. As long as this gate stands, so do we. She dropped into a crouch, rifle snapping up to cut down 2 soldiers, racing toward the breach point. Her shoulder throbbed from recoil. Her eyes burned from the constant sting of smoke, but her focus didn't waver. Above them, the mounted machine guns spat fire until their barrels glowed red. The gunners shouted warnings, each one nearly drowned in the cacophony of explosions and screams. Then came the sound Elena dreaded, the metallic shriek of bending steel. She spun toward the gate. The left hinge sagged visibly, pulled loose by the relentless assault. The metal groaned like an old tree about to fall. For a heartbeat, panic rippled through the squad. If the gate collapsed, the enemy would pour in like floodwater, overwhelming everything inside. But Elena didn't let panic take root. She vaulted from her position and slammed her back against the weakened hinge. Her body was nothing against steel, but her message was clear. She would hold it with her own weight if she had to. "Get ready," she shouted. "If they come through, we make this ground their grave." Her squad's voices rose in reply, raw and defiant. Rifles leveled, grenades armed, eyes narrowed. The night boiled with fire and fury, and the gate trembled on the edge of collapse. But the women were still standing, and if the enemy thought this was the end, they were about to learn the price of underestimating them. The wall finally screamed like a dying beast. A thunderclap of metal and dust ripped across the compound as the left hinge gave way, tearing free from its foundation. The gate lurched, one side sagging open just enough to reveal a wedge of night, and beyond it, dozens of enemy soldiers surging forward. "Contact inside. Breach, breach." Elena's shout cut across the radio, even as she fired into the dark slit. 2 men dropped before they could reach the gap, but more pressed forward. The enemy smelled blood now. The squad reacted with brutal efficiency. Nyla rolled forward, pulling the pin on a frag and tossing it cleanly through the opening. The explosion lit the night, silhouettes flying like broken dolls. Before the dust cleared, Rena swung her rifle up and unleashed a controlled burst, cutting down stragglers. But the enemy kept coming. Through the breach, shadows poured, tripping over their dead and wounded but never stopping. Elena's squad fell back step by step, guns spitting fire in tight bursts, making every bullet count. The courtyard inside the gate transformed into a killing zone. Sandbags toppled, crates shattered, dirt soaked in blood. Second line, Elena ordered, her voice steady though her pulse thundered. The women retreated to a reinforced barricade 20 meters back, regrouping behind its heavy plates. From here, they could fire directly into the breach. The tactic slowed the attackers, funneling them into a gauntlet. But Elena knew the truth. The gate was lost. She pressed her radio again, voice low but firm. "Command, this is Outpost Echo. The wall is compromised. We're holding for now," but she hesitated, just for a breath, before forcing the words out. "But we won't last long without reinforcement." Static hissed back. Then a voice, clipped and grim. "Echo, negative on reinforcements. Every unit's tied down. You're on your own. Hold if you can. Delay if you can't." The words hung like a death sentence. Elena clenched her teeth, shoving down the surge of rage and despair. She couldn't afford to let her squad seed out. She turned instead, scanning their soot-streaked faces. Exhaustion carved deep lines, sweat and blood streaked across skin, but their eyes still held fire. "They think we're breaking," Elena growled, raising her rifle to her shoulder again. "They're wrong. We hold this ground, no matter the cost. You hear me?" The answer came in unison, rough voices rising from raw throats. "We hold." And so they did. The next wave crashed against them, but Elena's squad fought like cornered lions. Every shot was a lifeline, every grenade a desperate prayer. The enemy faltered, stumbled, and fell. Still, numbers pressed on. Ammunition belts dwindled. By the time the second hour of fighting bled into the third, Elena's shoulders ached from recoil, and her rifle barrel glowed faintly red. The gate was gone. But somehow, unbelievably, the women still stood, and the enemy had yet to claim the compound. By midnight, the battlefield was a furnace of smoke and screams. The once proud wall was a broken shadow, twisted steel and shattered concrete marking where the gate had fallen. The ground beyond was littered with the dead, enemy and friendly alike, yet the attackers kept coming. Elena crouched behind the barricade, swapping a fresh mag into her rifle with trembling fingers. Her hands were raw from handling metal, blisters forming under her gloves. Her throat was so parched it burned to swallow. Beside her, Nyla exhaled shakily. "We're almost dry, Elena. Maybe 100 rounds left, total. And 3 frags." "Make them count," Elena answered simply. Above them, Rena's machine gun rattled again, short, disciplined bursts, each one chipping away at the tide. But Elena could hear the hesitation in the rhythm. Ammunition was running thin everywhere. The enemy seemed to sense it too. Their attacks grew bolder, closer. A squad of them rushed straight across the open ground, spraying fire. One bullet cracked so close to Elena's cheek it burned her skin. She leaned out, sighted, and squeezed. 2 down. Nyla finished the last with a clean headshot. But the breach widened. More poured in. "Elena!" Rena called from above, urgency sharpening her tone. "They're massing again north side." Elena didn't waste words. She vaulted up from cover, sprinting across the inner yard toward the northern flank. Her lungs screamed with the effort, every step dragging at muscles already wrung dry. What she saw there nearly broke her. Dozens of enemy soldiers had circled wide, converging on a weak stretch of wall unguarded since the breach began. If they broke through here, the compound would collapse completely. Elena skidded to a halt, heart hammering. For a second, she felt the weight of inevitability, the crushing realization that they couldn't be everywhere at once. Then her eyes caught a forgotten crate near the wall. A weapons cache, still unopened. She sprinted to it, tore the lid off, and nearly laughed with relief. "Claymores! On me!" she shouted, waving her squad over. Together, they planted the mines in a jagged line along the inside of the wall, wires leading back to a detonator Elena clutched tight in her palm. The enemy drew closer, charging hard, shouting victory already. Elena waited, until their boots pounded within the kill zone. Then she slammed her thumb down. The night split open. A roar of fire and steel ripped through the attackers, hurling men into the air, tearing their charge to pieces. The shockwave threw Elena back against the sandbags, ears ringing. When the dust cleared, the northern flank was silent. Bodies lay strewn in the dirt, the survivors crawling away in terror. Her squad stared, wide-eyed, breathless. For the first time that night, they allowed themselves a flicker of something dangerous. Hope. Elena forced herself up, shoulders aching, legs trembling. She raised her rifle again, steady despite everything. "We're not done," she said. Her voice was low, but it carried. "Not until the last of them turns back." And the women of Echo Outpost raised their weapons again, battered and bloodied, but unbroken. Because if the gate was gone, then they themselves had become the gate. The clock read 0300 when Elena realized she could no longer feel her fingers. Her gloves were shredded, palms raw and bleeding from hours of reloading and firing. Her rifle weighed as much as stone now, every movement a labor. Yet still she fought, because the enemy hadn't stopped. The battlefield beyond the ruined gate had become a graveyard, but one that birthed new attackers every few minutes. Reinforcements must have been pouring in from some staging ground, and they seemed determined to bleed the outpost, dry no matter the cost. "Contact left," Nyla shouted, her voice hoarse. She swung her rifle, cutting down 2 men slipping between shadows. But another squad broke through, forcing Elena and Rena to turn and engage. Bullets sparked against sandbags, tearing holes in their dwindling cover. The women fought back like cornered wolves. Their weapons barked and roared until barrels smoked and shoulders bruised from recoil. But for every man they dropped, 2 more appeared. Elena crouched low, breath ragged, and pressed her headset. "Command, this is Echo. We've been holding 6 hours past breach. We are out of ammunition, out of strength. If reinforcements don't come soon." Static again. Then silence. For the first time, Elena wondered if anyone was still listening. She looked around at her squad. Rena's face was ghost pale, a bandage around her arm soaked crimson. Nyla's lip trembled from fatigue, though she still fired with mechanical precision. Across the barricade, Yara sat slumped against the wall, her rifle empty, clutching a sidearm with shaking hands. They were ghosts already, fighting on sheer will. And then the world cracked again. An RPG streaked overhead and slammed into the barricade. The blast ripped it apart, wood and metal shattering, fire licking across the yard. Elena was thrown back, ears ringing, lungs seized with smoke. When she clawed her way upright, she saw the barricade was gone. And through the breach, enemy soldiers poured in like floodwater. This was it. The end. Her squad staggered into a desperate circle, backs to each other, firing pistols and rifles until chambers clicked dry. They fought with knives, with fists, with sheer feral defiance. Elena herself drove her blade into a soldier's gut, twisting until he fell, then wrenched up a dropped AK and kept firing. But the tide pressed closer. She saw it in Nyla's eyes, the understanding. They wouldn't last another 10 minutes. "Elena!" Nyla gasped, ducking as bullets sparked overhead. "We can't." "Hold!" Elena roared, voice ragged, throat raw with smoke. She fired until her rifle clicked empty again, then swung it like a club. "We hold this ground." Somewhere deep inside her chest, a final reserve of fury ignited. It spread to the others. They screamed as they fought, women against an army, refusing to bend. For one last terrible, endless hour, the gate burned with their defiance. At 0430, silence finally fell. It was not victory. It was exhaustion so deep it felt like death. The enemy had broken. Somewhere beyond the ridge, their commanders must have called retreat, or simply decided the outpost was not worth more blood. Whatever the reason, the attackers had melted back into the darkness. But inside the compound, nothing felt like triumph. Elena staggered through the smoke-choked yard, rifle hanging limp in her grip. Her boots slipped on blood. So much blood, most of it not their own. Bodies lay strewn across the breach, stacked in grotesque layers, evidence of the nightmare they had endured. Her squad was scattered, wounded but alive. Rena leaned against a wall, arm bound tight with cloth, eyes staring blankly at the horizon. Yara sat slumped in the dirt, head bowed, pistol still clutched tight. Nyla crouched near the gate, face streaked with soot, staring at the destruction with hollow eyes. They had survived, but what had it cost? Elena dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she pressed her headset one final time. Command. Echo still holds. The gate stands barely. We need medevac. Ammunition. Anything. This time a voice came back. Calm, distant, almost unreal. Copy, Echo. Reinforcements en route. You did well. Did well. The words felt like mockery. Elena looked around at her squad, at the wreckage of the outpost, and wondered if anyone outside these walls would ever understand what they had endured. The sun began to rise then, pale light spilling across the battlefield. It painted the broken wall gold, casting long shadows over the fallen. In that moment, the outpost looked less like a ruin and more like a monument. Elena stood slowly, dragging herself upright despite the screaming protest in her muscles. She looked at her team, battered but unbowed. We held, she said softly. The others lifted their eyes to her, and though none of them spoke, she saw it in their faces, pride, grief, and the steel-hard knowledge that they had written themselves into the mountain's memory. When reinforcements arrived hours later, they found 4 women still guarding the broken gate, unyielding, silent, but alive.